Remember, we always want things to be in writing, but with respect to assessments, an actual assessment plan must be given to you as the parent. The assessment plan needs to be in writing. The assessment plan needs to indicate all the areas in which they're actually going to perform an assessment on your child, because there are many, many areas: occupational therapy, speech and language, psychoeducation. So number one, the first thing is you want to make sure you get that assessment plan. The next thing is after you get that assessment plan signed and get it back to the district has 60 days to perform those assessments and conduct an IEP where those assessments will be discussed. If you go to the IEP meeting or the PET meeting, depending on what state you're in, and they show up and you haven't had the assessments yet, you're not going to be in a good position to discuss them, as we just discussed. So one of the things that you need to do, number one, is request copies of those assessments in writing prior to the IEP meeting. And number two, you want to request the protocols of the assessments that are performed. And it's important to understand that protocols are not the same things as, well, let me put it this way. Protocols are the sheets that the assessor fills out where answers are made. You can always get a copy of the protocols for all the tests that are done, and it's important that you get that for a couple of reasons, which we'll discuss later on. If the district performs an assessment and you disagree with the assessment, the next thing that you want to do as a parent is you want to get an independent educational evaluation, or what's also known as an IEE. In order to get an IEE, there's two ways that you can do it. You can do it at your IEP meeting where the assessment is gone over. You can say in your IEP meeting that you disagree with the assessment, that you request that the district conduct an independent education evaluation at district expense. But the most important thing is if you do that at that IEP meeting, it has to be in the IEP notes. Remember, we were talking about what's said at the meeting versus what's in the notes. So you have to make sure that if you disagree and you request that the IEE is funded by the district, that it's actually reflected in those IEP notes. The other way that you can do it is you can, under separate cover, write a letter to the district saying that you disagree with the assessment, saying that you request that the district fund an independent education evaluation at their expense. What happens if you get an assessment from the district, you disagree with it for a variety of reasons, some of which you'll hear about in Dr. Perlman's presentation, and you've requested an IEE and the district does nothing? Is the process over? The process is not over. The next thing that you can do is one of two things. Your school district then has two options, guys, and don't let them tell you any different, because they'll try to if you let them. The first thing is they either need to fund your independent education evaluation, or they need to file for due process themselves to defend the appropriateness of their assessment. It's only two options. They're going to try stall tactics with you, so be prepared for that. But those are really the only lawful options that they can do. Number one, fund your IEE. Number two, file for due process. Let's say they fund your IEE. What's the next step? They need to provide you with a list of independent education evaluators in the particular area that you're requesting an assessment. Now, once they've provided you with that list, do you have an obligation to choose the people that are on that list, since they've given it to you? No, that's correct. You do not. They have an obligation to provide a list of assessors. You do not have an obligation to choose from that list. You may choose your own assessor or private evaluator. The only requirement is that they be competent to perform an assessment in that area. But don't let them tell you that since they provided the list that you then have to choose from that list, okay? What happens if they don't agree to fund the independent education evaluation, but they also haven't filed for due process? What's your next step? You can file something called a compliance complaint with your local Department of Education, and there's actually a term, and it varies in state, but this is the term that you're looking for. Your complaint resolution process. You'll file a complaint through there, and what that basically says is it's a complaint saying that the district has one of two choices. They either need to fund or they need to file for due process. And if they don't do either of them, that complaint resolution process will ensure that they do one or the other. I know I'm going through all of this very, very quickly with all of you because I want to make sure that Dr. Perlman has an opportunity to go through these. But basically, the important points to take away, and you guys all have the books, and everything that I'm talking about is in the book. But the first thing, just to make sure is that you know as parents, is the district has an obligation to assess your child under child fine. And they need to assess in all areas of suspected disability. That's the first thing that you need to know. The second thing that you need to know is that there is a process by which you as parents have an opportunity for the district to pay for your child to be assessed by an evaluator or an assessor of your choosing. And as this day goes along, you're going to hear about how critical it is for you to have your independent education evaluation or your private assessor actually perform an assessment in the areas of suspected disability. The other thing that you need to know is the actual process. You need to be provided with an assessment plan in writing. You need to consent in writing to the assessment plan. You need to return it to the district. They have 60 days from the time that you return it to the time that you have to convene an IEP to discuss it. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to talk to them after Dr. Perlman presents, because I know that was very, very quick.
Great, great, great. Okay. First, the two most important things. Video guy, make me look thin. Audio guy, I need to sound like 007. Any of the characters you can choose. So we're going to go over 4 things. And we're going to do this quickly, but and we're definitely going to be going over whatever the time shows that's on your sheet. So 4 items. Why assess, how to choose an examiner, what to share with the examiner, and what is a good examiner examination. So starting with the first point, why do we assess? About 25 to 50% of the population that I see, it's for this particular reason. They want a parent or whoever the referral source is they want ammunition. Ammunition to, if it's a parent, to support their position. And it goes something like this. With me, it almost is always with email rather than phone call. So someone emails me and says, gee, I'd like to get my child assessed. And I email back and say, why now? And they email back and say, my attorney told me to. And that's fine. That is fine. I just need to know then that I'm going to go talk to the attorney about why they want the child assessed now. What isn't cool would be, and it's the next thing, another reason to assess is to answer questions. What isn't cool is when a parent will not be, there's no reason for, with an independent examiner, not to be completely honest and say why you want to assess. And it's okay if it's because you want to win in due process. I don't know that it's my role at that point, but to do that, to help you win in due process, but nonetheless, that's okay to share with me. What isn't cool, though, is to come on in, a parent will come on in and say, I just want to know what my child's needs are, if that's not what a parent really wants. Because what will happen is something that happened to me about 2 weeks ago, is I assessed a child. I determined what the child's needs were, and this child, one of the rare children actually that I see, because that had autism and that I also thought was probably mildly mentally retarded. And I say that's rare because I just rarely see a child that, no matter what they've been diagnosed before, that I find to have mild mental retardation. But nonetheless, this child did, and he was about 14 years old, and so I gave all my recommendations and then the comment from the parent, and I charged a fortune because I'm expensive, and the parent said, but Dr. Perlman, this doesn't help me. I said, what do you mean it doesn't help you? I told you what you wanted, which is what your child needs at this point, who your child is, what his capabilities are, and what your child needs. The parent says, but I can't take this to my district and get what I want in IEP. And at that point, of course, I want to say, but that's not what you came in with when we talked about what it is that you needed. If the parent would have told me that they would want their child educated in a particular type of classroom, etc., that would have been fine. My evaluation would have been the same, by the way. It's just that I wouldn't have charged them to write up the report, because the moment I knew that I couldn't support their position, we would have had a meeting and sat down and said, you know what, this isn't going to go that way because I can't agree with the position that you're taking. So at least we would have had a dialogue. Again, the data is the data, and it wouldn't change my recommendation, but it would have helped because we would have, in the beginning, we would have had this dialogue to say, when is the clock going to stop between you and I? The clock will stop when I feel that I really can't do anything for you here, and there's no reason for me to write a report that then becomes discoverable in a particular situation if either I'm subpoenaed or anybody else is subpoenaed. Moving on, but again, still, why do we assess? The two reasons really why to assess, two good reasons to assess about answering questions is, why does my child whatever, or what does my child whatever? What do I mean? Why does my child, and you can plug in anything there. One question I get often is why does my child make my life miserable? A special needs child is like is like my little miniature, hyperactive miniature pincher that I have. You know, the prince, he's taken over the entire house. You know, everything revolves around him. And a special needs child is similar. It seems like that the whole house winds up revolving around them. They want to know, why is my child frustrating me so much? Why does he get up in the middle of the night every night and scream and crawl into my bed? Why don't they get along with neighborhood kids? Why is my kid gravitating toward marginal peers? Or, what does my child need to becoming a functional adult later in life? What does my child need so he can communicate, socialize with friends in the neighborhood, things like that? Okay. Again, still, why do we assess? We assess to identify problem areas. Sometimes it's for differential diagnosis. I call that differential diagnosis. Is it this or is it that? Does my child have autism, or is it truly just a language disorder? Is this ADHD, or is this bipolar mania? Is this depression, or is my child just oppositional? Is that why they're behaving the way they are? So is it this or that? So differential diagnosis would be a good reason to assess. Another reason would be to target the interventions. And in targeting the interventions, do we go with a shotgun approach, or do we actually, to where we have multiple interventions happening at one time, or does the data support, or the type of interventions that we're going to target, support that there should be some sort of sequential effect to it? What do I mean by that? If a child has classic dyslexia, let's say, and especially if it's combined with visual dyslexia, then they have certain processes that they have deficits in. Rapid autonomic naming, and I'll describe these, perhaps if it's not in this one, it might be in session 6 later on today. Rapid autonomic naming, phonemic awareness, visual dyslexia, they may need some vision therapy. Those are particular types of interventions that we would actually do a shotgun approach, meaning that all those interventions can happen at the same time. They're not sequenced in a particular way. But there are interventions that should be sequenced. So for example, if we're trying a medication intervention or a biomedical approach, should we try that before so we can improve the intention before your child might benefit or get the maximum benefit from other types of interventions? Similarly, many OTs will recommend, and I support this as well, that we want to get a head start, let's say with the sensory integration, so that way when you do an RDI intervention or some sort of intervention, the child is now more available to learn because we have a jump start on something. So that would be what I call changing the firing order of a particular intervention. Again, these are all under reasons to assess, targeting the interventions. Another reason would be getting the most bang for the buck. The last assessment that I did where I had to fly out of town, which was last month in San Jose, I remember the parent picking me up at the airport, and I thought I was going to die before I got to the house, because the father made it very clear to me that based on my recommendation, he was ready to take and get a second mortgage on his house and take out all the equity. They're from China. He was ready to move back to China and work so he could send money to the States to fund whatever program that I recommended. He just wanted to know one thing, and that was, can his child benefit from the program that I'm going to recommend? Because he will only do that at my recommendation depending on how confident I am that my recommendations will be accurate. But I can do that. Or I can, by testing a child, I can say, I can't give you that information. But if I'm passionate about something, that's a fine recommendation to share with your examiner as far as what you want. Look, I don't want to wait. Not only do I want to waste my time, I don't want to dump everything out of my home equity because I also have 2 other kids. I'll do it to save this child's life if it's appropriate, but Dr. Perlman, help me out here, because I don't want to do it and then get nothing out of it at the same time. Can your testing show me that? That's a very valid reason to assess. Response to intervention. So let's say, what's that? On that particular child was I actually, by reading the files, I actually thought that I wasn't going to get much out of the child and thought that I wasn't going to be able to answer anything for him, but the answer was yes on that child. I said it was worth emptying your accounts for, and you will see progress with this child. It'll be meaningful. And you only have to do it for about 3 months, and you'll start seeing the intervention work. That was my prediction. So that was last month. We'll see what happens. Stay tuned for part 2. Perlman either goes totally under, and no one will ever use him again. Or okay, so response to intervention. I love this one. I don't know why people don't talk about it more. And I'm not talking about what's now become big, response to intervention and No Child Left Behind and things like that. But when I look at files, when I look at what I'm testing, one good reason to test is, have we been able to move the learning trajectory? So if I go in, and I love this, when I go in and read school files and I see that their learning has been flat, whatever it might be, at whatever age, whether it's really, the goals are extremely important to write the goals very specifically, but for my end of it, I'm not looking at the goals. I'm looking at the child's capability as well as their awareness, their ability to be part of the world, the real world. And if I see that 1 year, 2 years, whatever it is, has gone by, and they're about the same now as they were when they started a program, that's a problem. Because if I find that they're capable, and then I recommend an intervention strategy, and I come back 3 to 6 months later and we start seeing a change in the learning trajectory, as far as I'm concerned, it's all over at that point. Because I can passionately go into a due process and argue that, and I would show it just like this to the hearing officer. This is the way that it was, in the program. This is the way that it is now in the program. Now there's a problem here, and I don't know if I have it at this juncture in my slides or not, and that's if a parent does 2 programs at the same time. So let's just say the parent continues with the district's program that was doing this, and the parent also then started a private program of ABA, and now you're doing 2 programs at the same time. The data becomes muddied, for me especially, because yes, I could explain to a hearing officer, well, they've had the child for a year and it was like this. The only thing that changed is we put an ABA program and it changed the trajectory. That's good, but the hearing officers in California, I should say anyway, that just changed recently, some of them have been civil judges, and they ask some tough questions. And the questions that they will ask me are things that I would have to do in a civil proceeding, which is, well, Dr. Perlman, you're saying that this program changed the trajectory. What percentage of the improvement of this child can we attribute to the change? What percentage of this program should we attribute to the school district? What percentage should we attribute to the home program? And it makes it very difficult for me to do that, which is why many attorneys will say, if you're going to be starting a particular intervention, then you have to, especially a powerful intervention such as a 40-hour, 25-plus hour ABA intervention, then if you're going to be looking at the possibility of due process, one technique is to pull them from the program, because then if you pull them from the program and I see the learning trajectory, I can say, well, Your Honor, 100% of the intervention that the parents did can be attributed to the learning trajectory, whatever the intervention was, because nobody else had their hands on them. The district didn't have their hands on the child during that time, and it becomes easy. So the more you can help me out with that, being able to establish the trajectory, or the more you can help your examiner out by establishing that trajectory, the better that it is. Now, your examiner may not be aware of exactly what I'm talking about here, so that's okay. You're now aware of it, and you're going to feed them that trajectory. You're going to give the information to the examiner that's going to help them see clearly that this is where it was, this is where it is now. Okay, another reason to assess is major change in development, both in the kids and then as well as the test. This is an article was in San Diego Union Tribune on May 18th, and it talks about a recent study that came out, and I'll just read a quickie on it. It says, can you get smarter than a 5th grader? It says, of course, but the research suggests that the brain's building blocks for learning, most of them are at nearly adult levels by age 11 or 12. Now, that part isn't really so new. For instance, abstract reasoning. What is not true is that the older we get, the smarter we get. What is true is the older we get, the wiser we get, as long as we can remember it. then there comes an age that we just don't remember. All that wisdom is packed in there somewhere, but we just can't get it out. By age 17, for instance, abstract reasoning peaks, and then it goes downhill after that. Now, why a 17-year-old needs so much abstract reasoning, since they don't exercise good judgment with that reasoning, I don't know, but nonetheless, that's just pure research. But the article goes on to talk about performance in a variety of cognitive tasks, working memory, vocabulary, spatial recognition, reasoning, calculation, rapidly improves. Let me go to the next slide. Rapidly improves in here between actually 6 years old to 10, not even to 12, 6 to 10. It rapidly improves, and then it starts to slow up tremendously after that. So what happens, one reason to assess is kids go through very different developmental changes. Now, children on the autistic spectrum are more difficult with this because the development is discontinuous. It's not as clean as typical children are in the way some things develop rapidly and then some things develop more slowly. And then we have like a Swiss cheese effect. You have this growth, but you have these holes that are throughout in the way that their development is. But nonetheless, we have to develop tests around that. So it's no coincidence that test publishers have various tests that kick in at different ages. So I will get lots of, again, I don't know how it is in other states. In California, the school district becomes responsible as a child approaches 3 years old for the education. So I get a lot of referrals about right in here, right before age 3. The sad thing is that our tests take a huge quantum leap at age 3 because of the developmental shift that happens. So the new KBC2 IQ test starts at age 3. And then every year, incrementally, the tasks change on that particular test as well. The NEPSI, neuropsychological examination, that test begins at age 3, and age 5, it's a different test at age 5 because of the developmental shift that happens. So between 3 years old and about 8 years old, our tests make some major changes within that time frame. So you figure that's preschool through about 3rd grade, because 3rd grade's about 8 years old. So there are reasons to reassess because our tests become very different. Actually, annually from 3 on, our tests become very different. Now, there are 2 things that I have not talked about, reasons to assess in everything I've said. One of them, conspicuously missing, is a triennial. A triennial is not IEP is not a reason to reassess. And again, I don't know the federal law here, so they'll have to, I leave that to the attorneys. But I know in California, the only reason to do an evaluation at the triennial eval is if the school district thinks that the child might not qualify for special education. Otherwise, there's no reason to actually do the assessment. But what happens is all these tests, then it's just a machine that happens, and they give all these tests. And when parents ask me, and they'll send me a sheet that says either the test that my child is, they're wanting to reassess my child on, I just want the parent then to ask the district why. Tell me on each of these tests why you want to waste your time. Now, it's especially true for an IQ test, because IQ tests, the only real time an IQ test is truly 100%, no, I don't want to say 100%, let's just say comes the best to being valid, is the very first time that it's administered to the individual. Because once we see a task, it's no longer a novel task. And just because someone's waited a year to re-administer it again doesn't mean that we haven't changed the score a little bit, because now it's a little bit more familiar to the person. But when that test is normed, it's normed on people who have never, ever seen that type of a test. And so I try to be extremely protective of IQ tests, and I definitely put the districts to the grind to say, but why do you need to administer that? What are you trying to show me here? So that one in particular, I try to get them not to. And of course, academic achievement isn't, to me, it's okay to give that one time and time again, because we're hoping we're not going to repeat test items for that child, meaning that we're hoping the child is going to be growing academically, so when we re-administer the test, not only will they pass the ones they previously did, but they'll also pass future ones that they've never seen before. So academic achievement is different. That one could be administered time and time again. But those, well, that's fine. That's all I'll say on that. Okay, so it was quick, but that's why we assess. Let's go to how do you choose an examiner? The best thing is to access your parent network. I have to tell you that any wise examiner knows that it's the kiss of death for any one of us that piss any of you off because your parent network is so incredible, that the moment one of us does something wrong, it's going to be broadcast throughout the entire internet land, so... but you all are incredible. When I want to know something, I call up the parent network. As a matter of fact, I remember 75 years ago when I first got into children with autism, I got on and I didn't really understand it as much, then that was one of the first things I did was get on the internet and on the network and start dialoguing with the parents. I wasn't going to talk to professionals about it, but I wanted to know where the rubber meets the road, really, where the parents are, because you're the ones that deal with it. And you'd be surprised at how much, maybe not about the law that you know, but how much about autism that you know. Second, if it's ammunition, if that's the direction, you're wanting ammunition, or you want to, let's just say you want to ensure the fact that whatever you do with an independent examiner, that it will also be valid for, if you want to take the district to due process, ask an attorney, a special ed attorney, who to use as an examiner. Now, if you're going to be hiring an attorney to go for this, you have to ask your attorney because there's a great synergy between the attorney and their experts. And they speak the same language, they go to due process hearing together, and it saves a lot of time. So you have to ask your attorney because your attorney is truly the case manager of what happens from this point on. And that's that. So now if you're wanting to know more, you want to know needs, what you want to be able to discover what your child's needs are, and you have questions to ask, then ask 3 special ed attorneys. If it's for ammunition, just use your attorney. But if it's for, if you want to know needs, then ask 3 special ed attorneys because they really are great at being able, they read so many reports. At least like saying, Dr. Perlman, do you know of any psychiatrists? Well, yes, all the ones that I read the reports of, I can tell you the good ones and the bad ones. Even if I've never met the individual, just by the reports and by the outcomes of those particular reports. And same thing with the attorneys. Next thing is, if it's for intervention, because you're wanting to target some sort of intervention, so you want the needs to translate to what to do about those needs, then the best people to ask besides the 3 special ed attorneys are the community specialists. What do I mean by that? I mean the OTs, the speech language therapists, and the ABA programs, because if you're looking to target the interventions, meaning that you think that I might recommend a speech therapist or an occupational therapist, well, then you should ask the speech therapist or occupational therapist who the examiner is that makes sense to them. What examiners do you use that when you see their data, now you know how to intervene. And so you would get recommendations from them. Third, there are clinics, I don't know, again, what you have in your community in San Diego, and they're popping up all over the place now, in fact, even in the districts, are learning centers. And these learning centers do primarily, it's not like Sylvan where they do tutoring, but they're remediating the basic processes that underlie learning. That's where some of these centers have the Fast for Word, RAVO, PACE, and some of the other programs that target. Again, you would be asking them, who of the reports that you've seen, what examiners are useful to you since you're going to be doing the remediation? If you're going to a private school like Beacon Day School, ask them who are the examiners that when the parent brings in their data, that you find this useful information. And those are the ones that you would ask. Okay, let me change my slides. Next, what do we share with the examiner? You really need to share what it is that you want from the evaluation, and you need to be clear because we as psychologists might not ask the right questions. Well, let me amplify on that now. If you're going to do process, here's an interesting one that I just got 2 days ago. Actually, a week ago I got a call from a district, I don't know, up in somewhere, I don't know where it is, but up in Northern California somewhere, saying that they've approved for me to do an independent educational evaluation. Fine. Then 2 days later I got a call from the parent. They're excited to use me, they want me to do the eval, wonderful. And then the day after that I got a call from the attorney that said, let's talk about this. And the interesting one is that, yes, the district approved it, but they don't know what I'm going to say yet. So would I be willing to do a confidential eval in the beginning so that it's actually the parent that's paying me for the evaluation, and if they don't like what I say, of course they could bury it. And the answer is yes. But, I do confidential evals all the time. In juvenile court in San Diego, attorneys will call me up all the time and I'll do a confidential eval because they want to know, is the kid that's in juvenile hall, is that kid just in the wrong place at the wrong time and this was an isolated crime, or is this kid really a slime ball? And my testing would be a confidential eval, and if I say the kid is a slime ball, then the attorney buries my evaluation and I have nothing to do with it. Nobody knows about me and I'm not discoverable. And so that's what happens in this particular situation. So if you're going to do process, again, it's just very clear to be, it's important to be clear with the examiner what you want, because at some point I may tell that person, right from the beginning, I might say, you know what, this is one that it might not be good for you to first call the district on and say, gee, we want to use an independent examiner. Maybe I should come on in and do a test to see, A, whether your child is testable, B, whether I might be able to support your recommendations, and things like that. So this is a little bit different. I'm sure that Tim is going to be writing down a gazillion things about how this is legal or not legal, what I'm telling you now. It's a little bit different because it's not an IEE, it's not an independent educational evaluation. At the point that I get hired by the parent to do that, this is a confidential evaluation. It only becomes an independent evaluation for me, I'm not talking about the legal part of it, for me, when the district knows I'm involved, and it makes no difference to me who's funding it. When the district knows I'm involved, and this is going to be a report that's going to be handed in, that I'm going to be testifying to, my data is my data, and it doesn't matter who it is that cuts the check. It's the same report as an IEE. But as a confidential eval, I can give information that's not, I don't have to set to writing at that point. Okay, if you're shopping for a diagnosis, that's okay. I just need to know that. In California, especially I should say in San Diego, we have what's called regional center. Well, we have it in California. Regional center splits the funding and what to do with the child and things like that. But in San Diego, if a psychologist diagnoses a child as having PDD, pervasive developmental disorder, or even Asperger's disorder, or even autistic spectrum disorder, and doesn't say autism, they will get no services from regional center, period. So I agree with shopping for a diagnosis. If I think a child is autistic spectrum and I know that they're in San Diego going after regional center, you better believe the diagnosis is going to say autism and is not going to say PDD or any of the others that will wash it down. So that also might be important for you all to know about what your state does as far as the diagnosis, even for insurance reimbursement. Many of these, again, if it's not IE paid for the district, you don't have to worry about it. But when a parent comes to me, I put in all the billable codes so that a parent might be able to get insurance reimbursement. It might be to your advantage to find out from your insurance company what diagnostic codes they will or will not bill under. Because for us to put for a psychologist to put PDD, thinking they're doing you a favor because they don't want to diagnose autism for your child, they may not be doing you a favor at all, and definitely not in San Diego. Another reason what to share is that if you're questioning a diagnosis, to share that with them. I'll get this from family court quite a bit. So I'm a custody evaluator in family court, but if the custody evaluation is already done and there's a special needs child, they'll refer to me, and the judge asks this question. They don't say my spouse, but the judge will want to know, this is the complaint that comes before the court. One of the spouses will say, my spouse is depleting everything, for this child. But the judge isn't sympathetic to that. The judge just wants to know, is it necessary or not necessary? And that's a valid question, and to share with the examiner. Okay, I want a one-on-one aid. This happened, I think it was last week or the week before. Again, did an evaluation. This is what the parent wanted a one-on-one aid. And I have to say that this is I don't know where in your state or your city or your school district, most schools that I observe, a one-on-one aid is a very risky request. A one-on-one ABA trained aid might be different, but I'm just talking about a one-on-one aid. Because in every instance that I've gone in and seen a child that has a one-on-one aid, it is the one-on-one aid that is teaching that child. And I'm not sure that that's what you want, unless you have control over who the aide is that's going to be in the class, which is rare. So to spend money and fight for an aide may not be the way to go if you can't control that somehow. In this particular instance, the parent is the child's being tutored at Sylvan Learning Center, so the parent's going to approach Sylvan Learning Center about having one of their aides, pay for one of their aides privately to go in, and then maybe could see if the district will pick up on that, but I don't know. But it's a very risky endeavor because 100% of the time that I've observed it, the aide has taught the kid. So now you don't even have a credentialed teacher, let alone a credentialed special ed teacher, let alone a credentialed special ed teacher that understands autism or ABA. We talked about stopping the clock, so I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go on to the good evaluator and the good evaluation. 3 things. Evaluator is a detective, as a scientist clinician, that's not Christian Scientist, and as a maverick. I want to go over those 3 as far as for the good evaluator. So here we go, as a detective. So as a detective, what I'm talking about, and I 100% agree with the Colombo approach to, I forget what you were actually talking about the Colombo for, but I'm talking do the questioning and answering for the questioning for the district. But I look at when someone will call me up and say, well, what is a neuropsych eval? And I'll say, you know what, I don't know, but I can tell you that what I do is I am a detective, and that's what I consider myself. And a good IEE, a good independent examiner, that's what they are. They investigate the student, they investigate the data, and that's what makes them a little bit different. So what do I mean by investigating the student? Well, you can see that all 3, there's actually 4 separate areas here. And testing the student is the final stage, and is so it can be a small portion of the assessment. This is probably the most important part of the assessment, is the gathering and the reading of the files. And I'll explain that in a little bit. The performing interviews, sometimes. Quite truthfully, sometimes it's not. I remember on stand, somebody, the attorney of the opposing side asked me, did I contact any of the psychiatrists that had treated the child? And I said, absolutely not. And they said, don't you think that would have been beneficial? And I said, absolutely not. And there was dead silence in the room. He just assumed that I would think that talking to a psychiatrist about the meds would have been beneficial to my evaluation, when it was not. Anyways, the parent is the key. It's just absolutely key. And again, we'll go over why that's the case. Talking to professionals and school faculty, possibly not. But nonetheless, we have to do it for an independent eval. But sometimes, quite truthfully, it's a waste of money. Doing observations. I actually love observations in the home. That's my favorite, especially if I could do a surprise visit. But that's not for kids with autism. That's for adolescents. I love to go in and see all the holes that they put in the walls and things like that, and when the room is messy and things, they're horrified when I walk through the door. But anyways, going through into an adolescent's room is like going to their backpack sometimes. You reach in, you never know what's going to be coming out. Make sure you have an antiseptic, though, with you if you end up doing that. So school and community, I'd say probably at the most 50-50 do I ever get anything out of doing a school observation. Now I'm going to change that. With children on the spectrum, 75 to 95% of the time, I find it valuable to do a school observation. With children not on the spectrum, I just don't find school observations to be very profitable. I just don't get very much out of it, even in behavior disorder kids. First of all, they'll be perfect when I'm there, for some reason. Or with autistic kids, I kid you not, I can't tell you how many times I go and do an observation, and wouldn't you know it, it's the fire drill day. And the kid that I'm going to observe is sitting close to, if not right underneath the fire bell, that sets him off. But anyway, that's that. So, but this is investigative student. We do all these things, and again, I'll mention a couple things about each one of those areas in a minute before we even necessarily test the student. Testing's important, but it's, depending on the hearing officer, I can tell you that when a hearing officer, when I have read the outcomes of how the hearing officers report in their findings, most of the time, when they quote me, they're quoting me from my report. Most of the time when they're quoting teachers, they're quoting the teachers that I wrote in the report. They're still quoting me. It's just what I had put in the report on the files, they're quoting it. And so you probably, and think of it, this makes sense when we do a write-up. If you were to get this much information that you had to digest, and you saw a report that summarized all that information into one document, which do you think you'd go to first? And the hearing officers will go to my report because all of the information, every report that's ever been done on this child is going to be not only in there, but interpreted, and all the teachers' quotes and nice, italicized letters so they go right, their eyes can go right to it and things like that. So it becomes one of the most important parts of the independent eval. And besides, for my own self, I have to tell you that previous data is important because, for many reasons. For many reasons. I'll explain that in a little bit, maybe. Okay, when we that's investigating the student. Now we're going into investigating the data. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that we need to be less dependent on subtest names and then less dependent on the scores. So let's look at subtest names. I can't tell you how many IEPs that I've sat in, and I will talk about this child having visual dyslexia. They have problems with visual discrimination and scanning, and I have a slide on that. If not on this section, it'll be in section 6 later on today, what I mean by visual scanning. So I say they have visual discrimination problems. And the school psychologist, very astutely, arrogantly, ignorantly, whichever word you want to choose, will say, but Dr. Perlman, look at the TVPS, the test of visual processing skills that I administered, or from last year, or whatever it is. The visual discrimination subtest, he scored really high on. How do you justify that? And of course, the response is, what makes you think that the name of the test actually describes the process? It doesn't. Just because a test says test of visual discrimination is meaningless. So this is on the Woodcock-Johnson. This is the reading decoding subtest. When are the words on, to, in, cat, and dog? What do those have anything to do with decoding? Once a child, even at the kindergarten level, can recognize these words, it's recognition. What kid goes on? Never have I seen that happen. Maybe when you get to 3 syllables, maybe. But most of the time, this is just reading recognition. There's nothing to decode about it, but it's called reading decoding. This is the test called word attack, which has nothing to do with attacking words. It should have been called reading decoding, because what this is, these are nonsense words, and a child that follow regular English language, and we can read these, native, zoop, lish, right, but there's nothing word recognition about it for a young child because they've never seen these words before in text. And so this actually becomes decoding. So that's an example of we need to not rely on the subtest names thinking that they actually describe what the test is, because they don't. Reading comprehension tests rarely test comprehension. That's a rarity. That's a different issue, and it's entirely very hard to test reading comprehension. And when I talk about less dependent on the scores, why do these 3 people, only one got this item right, but why do these 3 people have identical math skills? Anybody want to answer that? Mary got it right. Tony reversed the numbers, but he got it right, right? He knew that 24 plus 17 was 41. He just wrote it wrong. And Bill subtracted. Good subtracting. So, but the math skills are identical. But on a test, she's the only one that would get credit. Now, if we took that mistake and we started multiplying it by actually 3, just 3 items, your child would start falling drastically on grade level, falling a little bit in age level, and fall some on standard scores, because grade level changes much more rapidly. You can miss 1 or 2 items and your grade level can shift rapidly on most of our tests, which is why grade level is a horrible statistic. But the skills are identical, but a good examiner is going to go beyond the final score and is going to look at, do we see any patterns about what types of errors that this kid is making? Because the remediation would be different. Why would you remediate this person, or either of these, on teaching them how to add when they both can add fine? That's not where we would target the intervention. This person might need vision therapy, or just might need the accommodation of doing their work on graph paper, where the things are individual cells, and they might then be able to line things up and see them better. And then this person needs to be on Ritalin and slow up. Then they might not make the mistake of that particular thing. Are you glaring at me? Okay. Just trying to say. I didn't say any cuss word yet, did I? Okay, good. Okay, the next 2 items I'm going to show you are on the same subtest, but they don't test. You tell me if they test the same thing. We give the child some cards. They need to put this in order, whatever it is. Okay, they put that in order. Now let's look at this one. Now, already you're going to have to take a moment to even look at it to see what the order is. Got it? I don't hear any laughing, so you didn't get it yet, did you? Anyways, so this guy goes in, and of course, the next one is he asks for the rope over there. The guy gives him the rope, he ties the guy up, and robs the cash register. Oh, here, he gets the rope, wants the rope, gets the rope, ties the guy up, and robs the cash register. Are these two items testing the same thing? And the answer is yes and no. The group data actually show that they are testing the same brain process, but they may not be testing the same brain process for your child. They're testing the same brain process in grouped data, in the vast majority of group data as neurotypical children. If a child has a problem with the social element or the semantics or the humor, things that are so characteristic of spectrum kids, including the more Asperger's type kid, it's interesting to see which items that they miss. And then, of course, it invalidates the test for the most part, but nonetheless. And it's for this reason that when I see that a report was written, that an intern tested your child, wrote the report, and then a school psychologist or whoever it is signed off on it, I wonder, but how could they do that? What person who is green, as far as in the field and doesn't really have the clinical expertise and the training is actually going to see these types of things and look for patterns, because it won't occur to them to do that because they don't have that type of clinical experience. Even if they had the wonderful training, they don't have the experience to be able to note it. So continuing. The burden, and this speaks to what I just said, the burden is on the test users to be better than the tests that they use. How profound. There is no substitute for experience because we must come to the independent examiner, needs to come to the interpretive task armed with research knowledge, theoretical sophistication, with clinical expertise. I think that as an examiner, it makes me a better therapist, and as a therapist, it makes me a better examiner. There's really a synergy between them. If I didn't see certain people in therapy, I wouldn't understand what it is I need to test for. And yet if I didn't know what it is that I could test for, I wouldn't know what constructs I might actually be able to get movement with in therapy. And I have examples of that not prepared for today that would take a little bit to explain of what I mean by that. But nonetheless, there's nothing that's a substitute for planting, and you know this as parents, we know this in every field as well. There is no substitute for planting our feet in the faceless planet and just walking it for a certain amount of years, and it's the same thing with the examiners. There's nothing that replaces the experience of a skilled examiner that's seasoned. So here's one, for example, just in looking at the files that this happened a month ago. I was reading the files. This is a 5th grader. I didn't even see the child at this point. The diagnosis was questionable, and it was totally missed by the examiner who gave the test. The test is just sentence completion. It's complete this thing with the first thing that comes to your mind. And it's along a lot of other items, more than anything else, I wish I could. And the number one male response is fly, right? If I could be rich, I would, and they finish it with the first thing that comes to their mind. My idea of a good time is what? What's that? Was what?
Having fun.
Oh, having fun. My good time is having fun. Don't ask. Shopping. Okay. I agree, but probably with different stores. On my birthday last time, I went to Fry's Electronics alone, and just walked around without anybody nagging at me or being nagged that I'm taking too much time looking at all that electronic equipment, so I understand. My idea of a good time is, and the response is, when? I'm not sure. 6 o'clock? This is a total Asperger's response. It was totally missed. There's so much rich data in just things that are in the files. That's pretty incredible. And that would have been it. It was all over. I didn't even need to assess the child at that point, although I did. But I already knew the diagnosis, And it wasn't even my data. Okay. IQ tests. IQ tests are important, but they're samples of behavior and they're not exhaustive. I was involved in working on the development of an adult IQ test, and one of the things that we wanted to try to assess was creativity. Because we know that creativity relates to intelligence. The problem is if I create the subtest, then I can't test you on it because I created it, right? So it's a construct that was so elusive that we couldn't test it. And we have several of those constructs. That's just one as an example. So we know that IQ tests aren't exhaustive. They're important, but they're samples of behavior. There are also tests that are assessing functioning on fixed conditions. Now, what I'll often get from a parent, not often, but enough times that it's difficult, and I don't know if I can even explain it right, is I'll have parents say, but was this test normed on an autistic population? And it's like, why would you want to do that? Are we preparing our autistic children to live with other autistic children only in a world of only autistic children? So I don't know why we would want to do that, is to norm them on an autistic population solely. And then the other thing is what is normed on an autistic population? Those, okay, I'm holding in a cuss word now that starts with C, by the way, those CR, you could do the rest, inventories, I won't name the individual ones, of Asperger's disorder, of ADHD, of autism. Well, now it's up to the test author to define what autism is and find those people and then norm it on that population. And it's a very limited, most of those tests have an outdated view and certainly not what's now held in the community as being the view of what autistic spectrum disorder really is. And so why would we do that, So the tests do assess under fixed conditions, and we know that your child may be similar or dissimilar to the population that was used, but it's similar to the population of the sampling that's used in society in the world today. So if we just understand that, then it might be a little bit better. Now, does that mean that we as examiners are able to capture what it is that your child can do from intellect or even present levels or achievement? The answer is no. We can't necessarily capture all of it, but that's okay, because I'll say that's up to you to show the examiner. And meaning what? Meaning that I know parents will tell me all the time but my child can do this, that, or the other. That's fine. That's fine. Just show it to me. Videotape. Do anything. I'll watch it as an exam, or not just me. I'm talking about, when I say I'm talking about us, I as the examiners. We'll watch videotape that you bring in, whatever it is that you can do. Just show us, because our tests can't. We can't develop all the questions that your child might know. This is especially true of children on the spectrum, because we know that children on the spectrum learn disjointedly as far as developmentally, and may miss all of these questions here, know all these, but never get to these because he already missed the easy ones and he knows only the harder ones. We know that. So that's okay, just show it to us. So let me keep going. Scores are helping agents. We shouldn't have strict adherence to any IQ because they could be entirely misleading. I know there was a question earlier, so I tried to put in a couple slides real quickly to address at least some of it. Verbal IQ, 30. I went into an IEP meeting with the school psychologist who astutely only gave it the child half of the WISC-3 at that time. The child scored very high on the verbal scale, didn't bother giving the performance side because the kid was legally blind. Okay? Why should they give a visual test for a child that's legally blind? That's fine. Then made a whole thing, this was the kid's IQ, blah, blah, everything's fine, and I thought that was great. Then sometime later sat in a meeting with the same school psychologist that came up with this, a verbal IQ of 55, a performance IQ of 100 on a child with autism. And my question, and then averaged the two scores out and said, well, he has about a 70, IQ. And I said, well, wait a second. What's the difference? What would have happened if you never gave the verbal IQ to this child? Since we know that autism is a language disorder, what if you would have used that same savviness when you had the kid who was legally blind and didn't give the visual part of it? Why not just do the same thing? Let's just erase this and say that that's the IQ. Oh, no, can't do that, whatever. Anyways, the IEP ended in disaster. But clearly, it's obvious what the child's IQ is here anyway. We would then take this away and say that why would we use the handicap and the impairment as part of what their ability is? We wouldn't, not to test what someone's innate intelligence is. The full-scale IQ on that case is ridiculous. Now, even with the child who's that is more neurotypical, when we have any type of splits going on within our IQs, not just verbal performance, any types of splits, we would never average them out and say that the average of the scores is their IQ, because that would be like putting one hand in the fire and one hand on a block of ice and saying, oh, I feel comfortable. You know, I mean, that's about how ridiculous it is. So anyone who does that, just know that they don't know they truly don't know what they're talking about. Now, but we can get more specific than that. Is this person's profile, which you would never see anyway, where 130, 85, and let's say they scored identically, all 7s over there, all 16s here. Is that person's scores the same as this person, where their verbal IQ is 130, their performance IQ is 85, but let's look at what's going on in here. So all I'm bringing out is that a good examiner is going to go beyond the scores, because these two people are not at all alike, even though their IQs were identical, including their verbal and performance IQs were identical, but the subtests that comprised their IQs were not identical. Neither of these scores are accurate because there's too much variance going on. You can't average all these scores out even to come up with the global scale on any of those tests. And verbal and performance, anyway, is not a research construct, so we know that there's no verbal and performance IQ anyway. But moving on. If an interpretive approach relies strictly on one view, such as verbal minus nonverbal IQ, it's going to fail for some children, so we have to shift approaches. One of the things that I rarely see in a report, but you should ask your examiner to do for you, is when an examiner just goes through test by test and just lists the different scores and things like that, especially I'm talking about in neuropsych or speech language. I would do this for the speech language person too, because we have a lot of tests that test similar things. Meaning, let's say if I give a list of tests of cognitive tasks, why not forget the way that the tests are clustered? Why not take all the subtests together, reorganize them, and see how the child falls? So this is actual data on a child. The CAS is an IQ test. CAS is an IQ test. An achievement, Woodcock-Johnson is an achievement and cognitive test. This is just, now this is all the data from 2 different tests that are just merged together, where you take 2 constructs, visual discrimination, visual spatial, and this is a visual dyslexic child. This is real data, where when we recategorize all just the visual tasks into visual spatial processing, visual discrimination, and you can see that this child has a visual strength and a visual weakness, depending on the type of visual disorder that it is. But it would be missed if the tasks weren't reorganized into their basic processes. Okay, so that's the examiner as the scientist and clinician that I went over. Now is the maverick. My favorite part. To not belong to the group. How's that? Being an independent examiner is a lonely situation, because it's not the examiner. I'm talking about an independent educational evaluation. It's not the examiner's assignment or responsibility to assist the parent or the district in winning the case. If it's a truly independent examiner, it has to be totally independent. If it's a confidential eval, it is absolutely the job of the examiner to assist you in winning the case. Now, I'm not talking about at the due process level. I'm talking about at the IEE, the Individual Educational Evaluation. We're to be unbiased. We can't approach it with any bias or investment in what the results are. The results have to be the results. Can't give tests that are only going to be in the favor of your child. They have to be whatever they are that we think we could do to do the job that we need to do. The source of the funding is totally output. It makes no outcome is entirely irrelevant. It makes no difference who cuts the check, because the bottom line is this: while under direct examination and cross-examination, whoever hires us for the examination at that point, when we have to testify to our findings. And it was the only time that Lynn and I almost got into it with each other was when I did an independent educational evaluation paid for by the school district. It was not on a child with autism, but it was paid for by the school district. And the district wanted to hire me to go to due process as the expert. I had to support my findings. And she said, oh, if you do this, then we go back to what I said in the beginning about the parent network, and it'll be the kiss of death, you know. Because if I go and I be tested, it doesn't matter. As an independent examiner, we have to be ready to respond to whatever questions we have on the stand. And at that point, because at that point, then if I'm hired by the district, I become the district's witness. Again, difference between independent educational or a confidential eval. They're not the same animal. With that, the good evaluation. Good evaluation looks at the files. What do I mean by the files? A good part of the story is already told. That's what I had said earlier. And the problem is, though, often it's told incorrectly or it's not told completely. So when a district will often say, I don't want you to, because they already know how expensive it is for me to go review all the files. They'll say, we just want you to do blank. And I'll say, then you need to just choose a different examiner because I have to see the files. The files are so rich with information of things that's already been done that it could be missed. And oh, well, we have a summary of the files here. Yes, but I'm not sure if it's been told correctly or completely until I see it for myself. Retelling the story can be very time-consuming and expensive, but I have to tell you that I think it's the best part of what I do. I think it's the best part of my report, even better than the data itself, is just trying to make sense out of everything that's ever been done before on this child. Can explain who and what the child really is. Sometimes a child isn't even testable, but looking at everything that's ever been done and said about that child becomes a rich source of information. What do I look at? I look at previous assessments. I look at the protocols. I'm looking for the possibility of misscoring, the possibility of misadministrations, possibility of raw scores of 0. Here is a huge one, especially for young children, and most especially young children on the autistic spectrum. If a test has 1 raw score of 0, the only reason why we allow in testing to, statistically, why we say, okay, if someone has a raw score of 0, meaning that they couldn't get a single item right, we will allow you, the test author, will allow you to take that score and convert it to a scaled score, but not to use by itself, only to use if all the other scores were accurate on the protocol, and you just needed to plug that one score in, or a score in, so you can come up with a global score. Most test publishers give you a way to do that. But we never interpret the raw scores. We never say, oh, she only scored blank on this test. No, he or she couldn't take that test for whatever reason. There's no score, and it's as if no test happened. If there are 2 tests, subtests within a particular scale, typically most test authors will say right in there, the whole test, you can't calculate anything except for the other individual subtests. There's no global score, there's no nothing. But this error is made more often than not that I'll see. So when I get the protocol, I'll say, oh, they didn't earn a scaled score of 1 or 2. They got a raw score of 0. They got nothing. They weren't able to take the test at all. And so it's sad because then it tells us nothing about that particular indicator. Why do I say that? Because when we look at even the definition of mild mental retardation or mental retardation, these kids are testable. In other words, if I come up with an IQ that says, this child has mental retardation, I got that child to perform on tests. They just earned a raw score that was, 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever, just small raw score. But it wasn't that the child didn't attend to the task, so I can now say he has mental retardation. That is not mental retardation. So that's why children on the autistic spectrum, when we see that they say your child has mental retardation because they scored so low on an IQ test, you got to go back to those IQ tests and see raw scores are 0 means this was a non-test, and they're actually applying a score in a way that it was never meant to be. It was never meant to be that way at all. Okay, so, and then finally on that same indicator, scores not reported, discontinuous scores. This happens on the autistic spectrum more than anything, discontinuous scores. When we norm a test, it is so tight when we norm a test and when we put tests through. So we know that every time I turn the page, it gets harder and harder and harder and harder. And after a few pages that it's gotten too hard, the child reaches a ceiling level. But when we have discontinuous development, that's so characteristic of the children with autism, what happens is they get several easy ones incorrect, and then a hard one correct, and then a couple easy ones, and then a hard one correct, and it goes like that. When we look at a subtest that has that type of scatter within the items, then the subtest is invalid, because your child was nothing like the population that we normed it on then on that test, because they're not supposed to get easy ones, then a hard one right, easy ones wrong, then a hard one right. The test becomes invalid. So look, just glancing at the profile, if you see all these X's, then a check here and there, X's, a check here and there, you already, just a quick glance, just to get a graphic and see that your test, that test didn't apply for your particular child. So notes. Read a file. School psychologist reported behaviors were within the normal range. Well, if we only looked at his report, we figure, well, this kid was doing pretty good at school, And then, of course, when you get the school files, you get lots of goodies, like the school psychologist notes that he summed up that thing from, and you get this. And this is all true data. I look at his notes. The child displayed impulsive behaviors, rushed through assignments, stated he was tired, that he didn't want to work, sought attention inappropriate, chose not to follow rules, telling his teacher, no, 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 repeatedly, acted out when made to do an activity that he didn't want to do, acted out when other students invaded his personal space. Later that month, the teacher penned a letter explaining to the parent, your child is only working when he chooses and is hitting and touching others. Timeout isn't working because I can't pick him up and put him there. Sorry. Child hit another student, made another student cry. In the future, he may be suspended. This is all the same file. Child kicked another child in the back and punched him in the chest. Now, it was wonderful looking over at the school psychologist and reading that, and then reading his statement how he found the child to have normal behavior in that classroom. Wondering, what is that classroom consisted of if that child's behavior was just like the other students? It was all over at that point, obviously. Okay, medical records. I love medical records. So this is an actual case. Child Protective Services came in. The parent had 2 children on the autistic spectrum. And, oh, God, was this devious from the school district. They called Child Protective Services on the parent, and then the children were taken away by misstatements that were made. This was on the Child Protective Service report that I read. Statements by 2 school nurses that said, basically, that the parent had Munchausen's disorder is what they were claiming in the report. So the parent went around and took people tried to make the kid sick, and went from place to place to get the diagnosis that they wanted, and blah, 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 blah. And on this claim, it says, these guys, the medication changes all the time, and they never even give room for the medication to work before they change it again. Well, so it's very easy. You subpoena the medical records, and here's the medical records of the child. There's nothing wrong here. From 1995 to 2002, which is when I had gotten the case, it's so easy to follow. They thought the kid was ADHD. They, not the parent, but the professional, no problem, clonidine and dexedrine. It obviously wasn't working, so they switched to another psychostimulant from dexedrine to Ritalin, same class of medication. They thought maybe this child would do better with an antidepressant, so went over here and added an antidepressant to it, and then stayed basically on an antidepressant the whole time. All they did is make one change to the antidepressant, but here the physician started thinking the possibility of bipolar, or maybe that the kid, because the physician didn't understand autism, adds a neuroleptic, Risperdal, and then keeps on Risperdal and just makes a change right there. But these are all, here's the classic medication profile for bipolar disorder, again, done by the physician. This is fine. There's not medication changes all over the place at all. So it was a lie. Same thing, school nurse to the school principal. School nurse tells the principal, this is all in the file, she is now convinced that the child is bipolar. Her other son has developed petit mal seizures. The family dog even has grand mal seizures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Love those files. 42 days earlier, the child actually went to a visit to a psych intake, a new psychiatrist, and he was so out of control that the psychiatrist hospitalized him. It had nothing to do with mom. That's how out of control the child was. But let's look at the other one. Son number 2 was diagnosed with a seizure disorder, and I saw the EEG that showed that the son had a seizure disorder. That's a pretty good case of Munchausen's disorder if the parent is able to fake the EEG. And of course, I have no shame. I called the veterinarian. The dog, notice I'm protecting his name for confidentiality, has been a patient of mine for 3 years. I initially saw dog because his epilepsy was worsening despite appropriate treatment with anticonvulsants. He's having multiple seizures frequently. Epilepsies are recognized as an inherited disorder in many breeds, including the Labrador Retriever, which was this dog. That note, these are direct quotes from either the file. These were from everything was from the school file except for this, because I had to get it from the pediatrician. If this was in the pediatrician. Hey, my dog is my child. Since my little babies are now all adults. And the only grandbaby I have now is a boxer. Okay, more on the files. I do like to look at the work habits, citizenship, teacher narratives, primarily for kindergarten and first grade. Beyond that, they start to get iffy. But kindergarten, first grade, we can pick up a lot of different disorders, and then maybe sometimes up to third grade. After that, what happens in most files is, especially after third grade, it looks like the kids look oppositional because learning disabled kids that have depression, things like that, we only have about third grade where the files at least read decently. At fourth grade, then they start to act out and things like that, and then they read differently, and kids get punished for their disorders. Okay, but looking at the files, this was again, we have CMH, County Mental Health in California. They're partially responsible under AB 2726 to do something with kids. That's about all I'll say. So these were two psychiatrists in bed with the school district. Trying to help this family. That blamed the family. So you look at the files. Again, this is what the independent examiner does. Kindergarten. Mary has great skills, but needs to change her attitude and become more cooperative. I love this. This is a classic ADHD profile, I want you to know, that I read in the files. First grade. Mary has excelled in both math and reading this quarter. Wow! Now, if I could only keep the talking down. And this is the way an ADHD file reads. It's, Johnny is so nice. Now, if we could just get him to stop socializing. That's just the way it reads. Okay, and in second grade, Mary tries to fit, and you can see how it gets worse and worse as the year goes down, which is why I say by fourth grade, forget it. Mary tries to finish assignments too quickly, capable of doing better if we're more attentive, needs to use more time wisely, interested in doing her best and tries to please, but could concentrate more on her work rather than others. And so they missed it, and they blamed the family. Families are always blamed. It's really terrible. Anyway, I love group achievement scores. I love different things. This is a child custody case I got, and you tell me who you think got the kid on this one. Father, of course, blamed the mother because said, if the kid were just with me, his grades would be fine. He's never had any problems. You go back to the file. Kindergarten. We have been working on Johnny's self-control and listening skills. Kindergarten. We're working on more smiles and cooperation. Of course, the teacher's saying your child is a pain in the butt, but they can't write it that way. First grade. Group testing comes out. Now, here's a learning disability if I ever saw one. Math applications, 82nd percentile, to math calculations, first percentile. But if the kid was just living with me, he'd be doing so well in school. Well, this father didn't know the child, and it's all out from there. So I love school files, even in child custody files. It's wonderful to go back to see what is it that's really happening. So interviewing the parents, professionals, school faculty, I said that sometimes I get good things, sometimes I don't. I made the mistake once, and this really was about 75 years ago when I was just getting into the field, that I tested a person with schizophrenic medicated, was on medication, and I said, this person doesn't have schizophrenia. Didn't even occur to me how stupid I was that the medication was actually doing its thing, and the reason why I couldn't see the schizophrenia was because the person was medicated, But that's the same thing that happens in autism. It's really interesting. So we put a kid in an ABA program, and he or she starts to look very neurotypical. And when you drop down at that slice in time, it's very easy to say, this child isn't autistic. It's actually a compliment to say that this child isn't autistic. If you're autistic, is that what you said? Unless you're autistic. No, at that point, it's a compliment to the job that the parent and that the child has both done to be able to say that this child doesn't look autistic now. And so one of the things that I get from the parents, of course, and you need to give this to your examiner, is you need to tell them all the different things that you did to remediate your son's or your child's difficulties, because if you don't, we won't know it. All we'll do is read a file that says speech therapy, 20 minutes once a week, and wow, they get all this improvement, and we didn't know that, oh, he was in speech therapy 3 times a week privately that you're paying out of your pocket. You've got to give that to us because we don't necessarily know to ask those types of things unless we know that. Otherwise, we'll attribute the wrong trajectory, improvement to the wrong thing. And with dyslexic kids or kids that have just some sort of learning disability, this is a biggie. Parent winds up doing all the work for the child, and the grades are great. And things. So we just need to know what are the interventions that you've done in order to improve on the situation so we don't misappropriate your child's improvements, or we know how to interpret the files with those eyes. And that's probably the biggest thing that I get, besides some of the genetics and hereditary issues from the parent interviews. With teachers, a teacher that tells me that there's an attention problem going on in the classroom, I have to tell you that that is totally meaningless to me. Maybe we'll talk about why later. Teachers don't understand mental disorders. They don't understand, so when they think your child is ADHD, they don't even know what most professionals don't know what it means, let alone teachers. They don't understand the processing nuances. They don't understand the etiology of the current behavior. And I have to tell you that I don't think that teachers in general are really good observers. And I say that in general, of the child with specialized needs. And this is my classic slide that I show because I was, again, this was many years ago now, and this kid was in a psychiatric hospital, a 6-year-old that I was testing, and I thought, this kid is odd, something is really off. And I remember calling the teacher and saying, is there anything that's going on in your class, before we hospitalized him? Oh, no, everything is fine, he's progressing pretty well. He was a gifted kid at age 6, and this is what he brought home just before he was hospitalized. And the teacher saw no academic problem. Gifted kid, the sailback is chasing the stegosaurus, basically, is what he wrote. Again, the kid was in first grade at the time, just starting first grade. Great for a first grader, but totally mirror writing. 100% mirror writing. It was interesting. And of course, she gave that to the mom, along with the other work, as in telling me that, doesn't see any problem, the kid's doing well. So I don't actually think that teachers are the greatest observers. Sometimes there's always gifted. Remember, gifted anything is not the norm. Gifted means that they're outside the norm. The typical teacher is not a good observer of the behaviors that are going on in the classroom. The gifted teacher can be extremely astute, but that's not typical. So, observations. Again, I went over one of the observations. Well, no, I didn't go over the one. I gave one of the things in the files. Observations. Asperger's kid. We are 46 questions into the math test, the math application subtest, graphs and charts and everything, and this question comes up. And it says, this is a graph showing the temperatures of the first 10 days in August. What's the difference in temperature between the hottest and the coolest days? The answer, well, I suppose we can't go swimming on the coolest days. Well, yeah, that's an answer. But we're 46 questions into a math test. What cue did I give you that said we switched from math to general discussion here, So it's observations just even within the testing environment, not just in the classroom, just experiencing the child. There's nothing more rich than experiencing the child. Essential elements, we talk about testing in all areas of disability, neurocognitive, academic, social, emotional. We don't necessarily need to do each of those it's an independent evaluation for your child. It depends on the suspected disability and it depends on what the referral is. But I do want to go over one last thing, and that's an information processing model. And this is just a model, so just to conceptualize from. When we think about the way that the brain works, we talk about input, mediation, output, storage and then output. So we have to get information into our brain somehow, and to do that, just like when we do it to the computer. So to do that, verbal, visual, smell, of course, taste, and touch. And recently, we know that there's a sixth sense that we can see dead people everywhere, right? And when we talk about, so we get something into the brain. When it goes into the brain, then we do something with it. We make sense of it. And this is where, if something is, again, we're looking at targeting interventions. If something's wrong with the way someone inputs, if they have an auditory, central auditory processing disorder, then we need to remediate here. If they have visual dyslexia, we need to remediate here. If they have auditory dyslexia, it's a combination of here and here because we're trying to do it as they make sense out of it. When someone says, I can't remember something, I always questioned whether they inputted it in the first place or is it truly in their brain and they just can't retrieve it. They can't output it after they're in the train. So we're testing for all sorts of things, but that's the way I would try to conceptualize things. You've heard of the term executive function, and executive function is a higher order type thinking that includes aspects of attention, something we call cognitive flexibility, planning, and abstract reasoning. And where that fits on that model is really the whole time. So we use, for instance, attention. We have to physically and mentally attend to something in order to input it. And then we have to continue to actually attend to this, whether it's in working memory and we're trying to figure something out, or we're mediating in some way into here. And that the better we attend to it and store it, the better we're going to be able to output it later. So usually executive function happens in some way throughout. Planning lights up so many areas of the brain as things are coming in and out and mediating and putting in storage and coming back. And it's not a straightforward process. It's one that can be, it is a process that can be assessed, but we use that process throughout the entire neuroprocessing model. 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, it's 11:30? Okay. So let me get, where are we at? Can I stop there? Can I stop there?
Yeah.
I have different points.
We're robbing Peter to pay Paul on time here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take questions, and we're going to have myself, Lynn, and Dr. Perlman answer any questions you may have. Then we've got a lunch break. So we got about 15 minutes for questions, and I'll let you go ahead and pose questions to Dr. Perlman since he just finished. And then if you've got other questions, we're going to make sure to get all your questions. We'll stay till as long as we need at the end of the day. But we're going to break for lunch because I think many of you probably need to stretch and grab something to eat and get back here by 1 o'clock. So,
and of course, if you don't make it back by 1, it's only important you make it back for my number 6 presentation. So the question is where can we get scientific information, or even information on more about this model and then how to apply the model? And I can't answer that directly, but I can go to the source on where I got this from. I mean, I can answer it. I just can't answer it right on the fly. I can go to the source that I got this from, who, by the way, is the author of Alan Kaufman, the author of the KBC, KTEA, is the K and all of the IQ tests and things that many of the IQ tests that we use. But I can ask Alan Kaufman directly about references for that model. Next question.
You said earlier that you weren't a big fan of one-on-one aids for the spectrum in general education class.
Didn't mean to imply. So the question is, I said, not the question is yet, the statement is I implied or stated earlier that I wasn't a big fan of one-on-one aids to an autistic child in a regular ed class. That is not what I meant to imply at all. I love a one-on-one ABA aid, trained aid, with a child in a regular education class, and I believe that that's the support that a child needs in order to prevent them from going into an SDC.
Or the other choice of being self-contained in an autism class where if you have a higher functioning child that can be in gen ed, what was the option, or what was your recommendation?
Right. No, my recommendation is a one-on-one ABA trained aid. Whether or not you can get it is a legal question, but that is my recommendation. And to me, that is the least restrictive environment relative to an SDC class when I know that a child, and I'm going to say more about that in my number 6 lecture anyway, because we'll go more specifically on that, all the way in the very, very back.
When you talk about the learning trajectory and how when you have 2 interventions that get combined, it makes it difficult to separate those percentages. I mean, what are your recommendations to parents that work full-time and that don't have the finances to support an outside program? How can you ensure that they have an adequate way of showing trajectory for what they're suggesting without that being combined with what the school is doing?
So the question is how does a parent really try to ensure the fact that the learning trajectory becomes clear for someone like me, that I can come back and look at it? And I'd say it's really data keeping, and data could be of video clips. I want to see more than what a lot of parents will often think about, because once we get into ABAs, we start thinking about reinforcers and SDs and things. I want to see your child in the mall, I want to see your child not walking with you in the mall, escaping and, and things like that.
If they're working full-time and don't
I understand, that's what I'm saying, but whenever you're going to do an intervention change, what I want to see is a good indication of what your child's capabilities are. You know, videotape you and your child together on Saturday. You know, videotape a dinner table conversation. Just stick the camera over there and leave it running, and you could edit it later to give the right clips, and then come up with a composite thing of this is what my child's adaptive functioning behaviors are, not on a test, but this is a day in the life of us, you know, depending on what behaviors they show. And edit it down and date it, and when, you know, this is June of 2007, whatever it is. And then you start a particular intervention, whatever it might be, or the school's going to start a particular intervention. Or this is when it coincides with the IEP, when they say they're going to be bringing in their behavior specialist to make major changes, that in a year from now they say, oh, your child is doing so well. Well, you have that video clip of the way he was, and then the video clip of the year, you can compare them. So it's those types of things. Video, and I have to tell you that, at least in California now, the hearing officers do stick those videos in and play them, more so than the previous ones did. They want to see it all, and they'll let everything into evidence. At least that's been my experience. So, right, and you had a question too, though, right in front.
I was wondering, I had my 3-year-old daughter for the evaluation, within one meeting, the physician had gave her a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Is that even possible?
At 3 years old? When you say, see, the last thing you said is it possible? You know, and anything is possible, but not everything is probable. And childhood schizophrenia is so incredibly rare, and in truth, I've never come across it. I've come across people who had been diagnosed that, and they were bipolar disorder, because it is true that someone can have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder that early. Schizophrenia in itself develops truly, truly, truly around ages 16 and 17. And you could see neurotypical development all the way through, and then, in fact, it's missed because someone has this religious experience at age 16 or 17, meaning they became psychotic, you know, at that point. And that's the more, not only is it the more classic, there's no question that the research is very big that shows that about 16 to 19, right in there, is about when schizophrenia happens. So I would absolutely question, not to the person who gave the diagnosis, but find out, to question the diagnosis. Yep. So there's right in front there. Yeah. Oh, loud. Use your outdoor voice.
I wanted to have more clarification both on the legal aspect and on the testing aspect between the 3-year evaluation, which tests for eligibility, but then the annual assessments that look at progress monitoring. Because we found, at least in my school district, they will do a battery test for the 3-year re-eval, but they're not willing to do a similar battery test annually. And what they say is that it's not really proper to continuously test using these tests annually, such as the PPTV or the Woodcock-Johnson.
So the question is about the appropriateness. You can always re-administer. You can always do an achievement test multiple times, multiple. You can use the KTEA, the Woodcock-Johnson, all those types of tests that are testing achievement are meant to be able to test multiple times to compare. You can do it every year. You can do it each 6 months if you want. The practice effects that come on certain tests are like the writing ones. But not necessarily not on the math and the reading and things like that for a practice effect. But the writing ones really have a high degree of, and the writing is number one, and I'd say the reading comprehension. But reading comprehension is very poor the way we test it in general. So those scores typically aren't really testing reading comprehension. But that one there would be a practice effect on as well. But you know, math, absolutely not. But there's a practice effect not just every year, but every 2 years. In other words, once they've seen the reading one once on certain reading tests, it makes it more of a practice effect. So, but they're wrong in what they said. They just don't want to test. And the PPVT, no problem re-administering the PPVT and those types of tests at all. There's,
I have a comment, you had made a comment regarding the coding. You had said that for insurance purposes, you would write autism versus PPNOS or Asperger's, and that's because the insurance companies haven't caught up with the lingo?
what I had said was that I would get, not I personally, but if I were you, that you would need to get in touch with your insurance company to find out what codes that they pay on, because you may find that they will pay more, they will pay because they do understand they understand autism, but don't understand PDD or Asperger's, and they might not pay on it. You really need to look at your insurance company, is what I had said. Now, the reasons for that, it's all about money. It's all about money. So to discriminate is what typically happens. What's that?
But they are ASD. PDD and OS is considered AS, autism spectrum disorder, and so
So the comment is, but all those things I just mentioned are considered autistic spectrum disorder. Correct, but there isn't a code, a diagnostic code for autistic spectrum disorder. There are discrete diagnostic codes for autism, Asperger's, and PDD, but there's not a diagnostic code for autistic spectrum. We know, or there's a group of us, myself included, that would put under the umbrella of autistic spectrum disorder those diagnoses, but that's not insurance. You know what insurance does? They look up the code. If it's not there, it doesn't exist. So, do we have time? Still? We're okay?
We've got some.
Okay, then there was, yeah, right there.
My parents were newly diagnosed 2.5-year-old ASD, and I'm starting the IEP process, and trying to understand how do you actually use an assessment, and how does it differ from a medical diagnosis?
So,
Diagnostic gives a diagnosis, and we're going through the process right now, and we're going to assess her.
okay, here's I got it. What I'm going to do on yours is I want you to see me and Lynn specifically afterwards. Okay, and I'll answer that one because I know that I have questions about that, and I want to ask you a question to get a question. So absolutely come and see us afterwards, and I will respond to that one.
In your talk, you talked about the difference between having a specific order to
Firing order of interventions.
exactly. Specifically for social interventions, how it doesn't seem to me that there is a specific test that would tell you in what order to teach certain social skills. Is there such an assessment out there, or is it just observation?
I do not know of any good test that tests social skills, quite truthfully. We have different inventories and things, but I don't know. Anyways, that answers the question. I don't know of any good tests. Now, as far as sequencing interventions, I have not looked into this extensively, but the last time, and I was not impressed by RDI when I first saw it a couple years ago, whatever it is. The last time I looked at it, which was about a week ago, a parent had an RDI book that was just actually stunned me. The sequence of interventions that they now have for social skills and things was very impressive. They've come a long way. You could almost write IEP goals off of that sequence. And they said you can do that online now, and that they have come a long way since when I saw it 2 years ago initially. So I would use those as a sequence. That's the best sequenced intervention that I've seen thus far, was that RDI book. So, yes.
I'm getting ready to enter the IEP process too. I'm still in early intervention. And the school district says to me they want his current therapist, his current therapist to do the evaluation, and they will base their goals on that. Is that legal, and is that?
Who's the therapist? What do you mean? What do you mean?
Early intervention therapist, they want that therapist to do the assessment, and they're going to base their goals. The school district to base their goals on early intervention assessment.
Yeah, I can't field that question because I think it's a legal question that has to do with
That's a Tim question.
because the district has a right to assess. So, be more for Tim.
Just repeat that question one more time.
Sure. The school district wants the early intervention therapist to perform their assessments, and that's what they're going to base their goals on.
There's no IEP in place now, right? Right, so that's the part you missed.
The district has a right to do the assessment process first, in fact, an obligation to. But if you don't agree or don't like it, that's where we get into this independent evaluation. And you can tell the district, look, go ahead and do your assessment. But, if I disagree on any request that it don't work, you don't have to say that at all. Let them do the assessment, take a look at it. And the worse it is, the better you can substantiate a request for independent evaluation.
In Illinois, you don't have to give those assessments.
Yeah, I'm with her. I understand what she's saying. She's saying it's strange that the school personnel doesn't want to look into their own evaluations.
Oh, well, that's sometimes even better.
Yeah.
Because, if you're looking at a school district that's not even meeting their legal obligation to define and assess a child in every area of suspected disability.
That's one of the reasons why we brought Dr. Perlman here today, is because sometimes the most valuable thing that you can get to change your child's program and to get a good one is to get the district to pay for an independent educational evaluation, do it on their dime, okay? So that's why I talked about earlier in terms of strategy. Sometimes being the passive-aggressive parent is the best way to go. So if your district is making up things that seem questionable and you do not think are going to result in a good assessment, and I'm not necessarily saying it's the right case for your child, it can be a good idea to just sit back and let it happen, okay? Because whether it's an assessment or overall program, it can be, in scope, relatively easy to overcome a bad program, a bad assessment. But when something is mediocre but meets minimum standards, that can be very difficult for us to overcome, even if we all agree it's not very good.
I want to clarify, though. You don't want to put your child in a program you think is going to be harmful to them, okay? So it's important that if you feel it's going to be harmful in some way, then you don't put them there. That's the advice I give to my clients. But if they're already in the program and you can wait a couple of weeks and have somebody like Dr. Perlman or an independent assessor go out and collect data about that program, you can show the before and after. You can show, look, he was making no progress or he was regressing, and then I put him in the trajectory Dr. Perlman was talking about. I put him in a program that was appropriate, and after 3 months, this is where he's come. You know, I had a child who participated in a Linnemood Bell program over the summer and made 2 grade levels progress in 1 summer in several areas of need that were not being properly addressed by the school district. So, I mean, it's great to get the pre and the post, and certainly if the school district, I'm going to add something else to the question, answer the question. If the school district has refused to do their own testing, for me as a lawyer, that's great news for us on a leverage side because they just failed to meet their child find obligation. Could they, in theory, adopt testing from somebody else? Well, yes, but we also would make the argument that they failed to properly identify all areas of suspected need by doing testing in preparation for this child's 3rd birthday. Okay, so I just added a procedural violation to my list of issues in my due process complaint. And you've also given yourself an opportunity to say, I don't like that test and I want you to pay for an independent. Okay?
Okay, we still have time?
Yeah, well, let's keep going until it's noon.
It's not noon yet.
Okay. All the way over there.
A follow-up question to the independent evaluation. In our district, I've had an independent evaluation done, and they pay for the testing, but their argument then has been, we will agree with the testing, but we then don't agree with the recommendations that the independent evaluator has made. How do you fight that? They'll totally accept the testing that the evaluator has done, but then
Happens all the time. I think school districts, it's easier for them to say, yes, we feel these scores are accurate, but we don't agree that this methodology is necessarily appropriate for the child. And it has a lot to do with what's available in that school district. Maybe this is not a method of instruction, even if it's research-based and something they could use. Maybe they don't want to spend the $900 on a license for a fast forward program. You know, just to give an example. Maybe they don't understand how to implement a program like this. And they're going to look within their existing resources to find out if this is something they could offer. If the recommendation was within the school district, they already have something established, a program that meets the recommendations or matches close to the recommendations. What we've seen is it's much more likely that the school district's going to come back and say, sure, we can offer that. We agree. So it's many times they're going to respond based upon what they don't understand and what they have available, or cost is another factor. And these are things, of course, that the school districts may not reveal to you openly. Sometimes they do, but in most cases they won't. That, you know, this is a very expensive program. If it's going to run them $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month, and may not be something they're willing to pay for. They're not going to tell you that.
One thing I wanted to add to that, but a lot of the times it comes back to what you were saying, again, putting the ball back in their court. If you have that testing and it says that this child has an auditory processing disorder or has that, you can't put the ball back in their court saying, okay, if you don't want to do this, what are we going to do? Because they have an obligation to address whatever it was that was identified. So if they don't want to use fast forward, what will they use, and that's a technique that you can use for each thing that the testing identified. And you can do that at the IEP or with a written request for prior written notice, which the district needs to reply to say why they don't need to address the deficits that were identified by testing.
Ask them to explain what concerns they have with the recommendations. And as Lynn said, we talked about this earlier, if they don't agree with the methodology that's being recommended, then tell them to specify what methodology, research-based, peer-reviewed methodology they will use to remediate this deficit. If they're agreeing that this is an area of need and this is an area that needs goals, then we're going to argue about the methodology, but they need to come up with something. They can't just say we don't agree. They're going to have to give you some reason, and that's where the prior written notice comes in as well.
That's when you do it, you
Make a request and ask for, it's really a request under it's in the back of your book. It's 34 CFR 300.503. The school district, if the parent makes a request before the school district either refuses to change or decides to change a service or a program for the child, there's a list of criteria they have to meet, including explaining the basis for their rationale, either rejecting or accepting your request. Okay? So, and ultimately they can still reject it, send you that letter and say, this is what it's based upon, and it could be based upon testing that they did, based upon data that they purportedly have that supports their position that the method of instruction they're using is adequate, and then you would have to take the next step, which in many cases is, I guess we're just going to have to file for due process, and you use your independent assessor as an expert, and that's where we're going to talk about. Let's try to those costs regarding this expert. If they've already been paid for by the school district, a lot of those expenses that you would not be able to recover under Schaefer, or under Arlington versus Murphy, you'd be able to to categorize it as an independent evaluation cost. Hopefully, it just really depends.
I would like to ask regarding data collection. Our school district has made the response back to me, those are personal notes of teachers or therapists that are working with your child. And I don't believe some of the goals have been met. I've never seen their data collection, so I have no proof that my child's goals have or have not been met. How do you get those data collections regarding behavior or specific learning mechanisms?
If they're gonna make a claim, they're gonna have to prove it up. If they say your child is meeting his goals, then they need to demonstrate that he is meeting those goals with the data. So if they don't have it, then they're not going to have a very good defense if you take them to due process hearing. They're going to have something to show for it. Work samples, or maybe it's not formal data collection where you have a behaviorist going in and they have a chart and they're checking off things or they're making comments, but they're going to have to prove something. Okay, even though if you filed, you'd have the burden of proof. They've got to defend themselves. So if they have no defense, it's more likely you'd be able to meet your burden.
Plus, the other thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, they're not personal notes if they're shared with anybody else. Personal notes mean they're only for me. It's like it's my dear diary for that day, okay? If they're showing it to other IEP team members or administrators, they're not personal anymore.
You've got access to all kinds of things, and in select cases, I even ask for copies of every email that has gone back between district officials, because I'd like to know what they're saying about my client. And it's amazing what you find out in email messages when people don't think they're going to be read.
The other thing too, in your IEP, you can also specify what data collection you do want and how that's going to be done. So for each goal, you can delineate, because sometimes you have more than one IEP team member in charge of each one. So there would be a certain way that a teacher would keep data, because usually it's qualitative, they keep notes. But I would have expectations that the speech pathologist would be keeping quantitative data. And then you can ask for even data, like my son, every single day, data comes home in the form of the notes from that day. What services did he get? What was challenging? What did he do well? Did the homework he took from home, did that actually make it into the classroom? And there are plenty of kids who have that, where a log comes home every day, and that could be a photocopy or an NCR paper. So all you have to do is rip it off and put it in your child's backpack, and then you can keep track. You can keep on top of what's happening, and that's not on backpack with backpack. But that's not onerous for someone to be filling that out on a daily basis and just ripping it off and giving it to you. And then you can call the school if, for whatever reason, your child destroyed it.
I want to book on just one thing with that, because I don't think it appears on any of my things anyway elsewhere, is that I read the dissents the IEPs. I read IEP notes and I read dissents. And for my evaluations, I don't necessarily read IEP goals because making it through handwriting is just an incredible task. But if anything else, if it is true that that they aren't able to demonstrate to you how they plan on measuring, they say your child has made wonderful progress, and it is true that you don't think that he has, or they haven't demonstrated to you. I do want to see on a dissent. I don't want you to tell me afterwards. I want to see on a dissent that I read that's nice, that you wrote in your own time, not at the IEP, that you come back, you want to attach the IEP that says, the district said, my child was making a lot of improvement. I wanted to believe them, however you want to write, but they could offer me no proof at the time that that their claims were valid. I asked them blank, and they could give me nothing. Because I will take that and write it in my report just like that.
And it doesn't have to be in the IEP minutes. I mean, like Dr. Perlman was saying, if you have something to say and it's after the IEP meeting, that's not the end of the discussion or the dialogue. You prepare a letter and you can categorically address each and every one of the contentions that are referenced in the notes. If you forgot to say something, or you realized, or you didn't understand, but you looked at it and it doesn't make any sense, put it in a letter or put it in an email and ask that letter and email to be attached to the notes as the parent comment section. That's your right as a parent to express. So we've got lots of questions, guys. We're gonna get to every one of your questions. We just have to take a lunch break so we don't collapse on you. So let's take the lunch break. We'll be back.